I wanted my kids to come to me with questions about sex before they went to a friend, before they read it on a bathroom wall or whatever, or in some magazine or something like that.
You need to honor each other and respect each other's body in order to honor God in marriage. That is holy. Degrading your spouse physically, that is sinful.
I think one of the things I say in premarital is really stay at the comfort level of the one who's least comfortable. And if you do that, you're going to be okay. God does give us, I think he gives us so much leeway in that, but it goes back to mutual consent that you both have to agree to it.
Sex is an important part of marriage. Today, we are answering your questions about sex. We polled everyone on Instagram to see what questions you have about sex, and today we're going to spend some time answering them. So, Dr. Kim, just going to rapid fire these questions off at you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Ready to talk about sex. Here we go. So the first question is, what do I do? What do you do if your sex drive is completely gone, but your spouse's isn't?
I think the worst thing you can do is just accept that's the way it is. It's got to be something that you work on and you work on together. Maybe last year I had a couple. It was really a pretty good example of that because he had tried to talk about it. Her sex drive was not there, but she wouldn't respond. She wouldn't listen to him. She wouldn't talk. He had an affair. That's not an excuse to have an affair, but they didn't deal with it. And then they did deal with it later on in counseling. And we worked. And the thing is, we were able to work on some things and work that out. Because I think a lot of times if sex drive is gone, why is it gone? Do we need to figure out why is it gone? Is there something medically there? Is it something that's happened in the relationship? Is it just hormonal? You know, what is it like that? And I had one wife one time that was astounded that her husband had an affair because she said, I just didn't think sex was important to him anymore. And so she didn't, she didn't have a drive, so she didn't. So I think we make some assumptions there that causes problems. And so my answer to that would be, if the drive is gone, the spouse's isn't, do something about it. Get on the table, talk about it, begin to take steps, find out what you need to do. Maybe a Christian counselor would be a good start because what I would do was direct somebody, okay, let's check out everything medically, make an appointment here and there, what's a guy or a woman, whatever it is, and get those things tested, hormones and stuff like that. And then talk about their sex life. When was it good? What happened between now and then? How do we get it back to where it was? And try to help them both see the value in it. And today with medications like Viagra and Cialis and stuff like that, people have sex life all the way through their married life, where there was, I think, a time years ago where people kind of gave up at a certain time because it just wasn't physically, it wasn't as easy to happen now. And so I think when you see sex as this gift from God, that you want to enjoy it as long as you can.
Yeah, that's good.
And in most marriages, husband's probably going to have a stronger drive than the wife, usually.
Yeah. But there's definitely exceptions to that.
There are exceptions.
That was such an interesting story that you shared. It reminded me that like so often it's just like we don't talk about it, right?
Exactly.
So like she thought that he was done with sex too because she didn't have a drive, but like he didn't bring it up with her. He didn't talk to her about it. They didn't talk about it. She didn't check in with him, and he didn't check in with her. And so that's so fascinating. A couple of years ago, Dylan and I were ministering to this couple where it was a reverse situation. So he had completely lost his sex drive. And she would bring it up, but like so sporadically. And she got so fed up with him, but it's like she'd bring it up twice a year. And she said, this isn't really important to me. And so they'd have more sex for about a month, but then they'd like slip off the bandwagon. And then she'd be so irritated, but she wouldn't communicate to him.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't initiate. And so it was just really, so like moral of the story, talk to each other.
Talk to each other. Absolutely. And, I think if you talk to each other and figure out some things, I think you can make sex where it's enjoyable. I know some couples where the wife may not orgasm as much as she gets older, but I've had those women tell me, but I still enjoy it. I still enjoy the closeness. If I don't orgasm every time, I still enjoy being close to him. And it is something that I thoroughly enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. Sex is a lot more than just the physical, orgasm. It's so much more than that. And so don't give up on this really important part of your marriage. I think another piece of advice would be like remembering that you have to get there mentally before you can get there physically. And for some people in certain seasons or as you age, like it's just going to take more time to get there mentally, but like work at it, pray about it, and like think about it, think about your spouse and like gear yourself up mentally before the physical thing. I think that can help a lot. And pray and ask God to give you the desire for sex again.
Yeah. And I think it's good sometimes to go back and relive with your spouse, talk about some sexual experiences in the past. during your life. And sometimes that will kind of stimulate. Yeah, that really was good. Why? I don't want to give that up. Let's work on it, you know?
Yeah. And like you, doctor had mentioned with the medications and seeing a doctor, like go see a doctor about it. Like, don't be nervous to talk about this. Doctors hear like this all the time. And this isn't like an issue that's unique to you. A lot of people, like you're so not alone. A lot of people have this issue. And so talking to a doctor about it can really help.
Absolutely.
And the doctor's not going to think anything of you.
No. And if you have a doctor you're not comfortable with, say you're a woman and you're OB as a man, switch to a woman OB if you feel more comfortable. But don't just let that be a barrier for you. Do whatever it takes to get in front of a doctor that can really help you see if there's anything wrong there. Same with a guy and a urologist. Is there something needs to be done to help you?
Yeah, that's good. So similar question. How do you regain the sexual energy in your marriage if you've lost it?
I think I usually have couples look at what worked in the past. Okay, what was going on then? And then, okay, would that work now, or would a form of that work now? And again, it's working on together. I think you can use that. You know, I talk off and on about the book Celebration of Sex, and it's illustrated. It's been out probably 15 years now, but it's really good. And I think a lot of times couples look at it. It's a Christian. It's not weird. Okay. It's not weird. It's not actual people. It's drawings and stuff like that. And so, but I think you can kind of stimulate again. Okay. Well, why don't we try that? We never did try that, maybe. And so you're working on it together and you're figuring out some things that might put a spark back in.
Yeah. That's good. That's good advice. Yeah. I think if you've lost your sexual energy in marriage, I guess I would have like a lot of follow-up questions, like what's going on outside the bedroom. Yeah. I think that's something you have to think about. Like, are you guys close? Are you connected? Are you having fun together? So I think doing things outside the bedroom can certainly help things inside the bedroom. I'd say it absolutely does. And so starting a weekly date night could help if you're not already doing that, so that you're having fun together and connecting on a regular basis. Also, like just trying new ways to romance your spouse, like and giving that emotional intimacy that will lead to physical intimacy or improve physical intimacy. Writing them sweet notes, surprising them unexpectedly, planning a weekend getaway. Things like that, I think, can really help.
Absolutely. I think all those are really good. You know, one of the things we talk about is 24/7, 365 foreplay. And basic principles that do something good for your spouse every day. And when you do that, I think when you're having fun with your spouse, you're communicating well, you're resolving conflict, it really opens the door for sex to be really, really good, because you don't have a bunch of constraints holding on to keeping you back there. And I think too, guys, you have to continue to be romantic. And I think that is something that as guys, we get very lazy about. We do it well when we're pursuing her. You know, I had a guy that he, in his proposal, he had rose petals from a parking lot in a church all the way up the sidewalk, all the way down the altar to where he was at the top to propose to her. You know, he didn't buy her a rose again for 10 years till they came into counseling. You know, I mean, seriously, you've got to continue to do things that are romantic because your wife loves it. She is Juliet, no matter what you think, and you got to figure out how to be her Romeo.
Yeah, that's cute. So next question, what sex frequency is normal?
2 3/4. No. Yeah, I always wondered when somebody would say 2.5 times a week. I thought, well, how do you do the halftime? I never figured that out. That just didn't make sense. But I think that we asked the wrong question. It's not what is normal, it's what's your normal. What season are the two of you in? What works for both of you? There were seasons in our marriage where before we had kids that, you know, a normal might be 4 or 5 times a week. Then you got kids and you're tired, and it was like, okay, we were working to where we tried to make that twice a week. And maybe there's time, you know, when somebody's going through a depression or something like that, that we just, you know, we're just going to back off for a while until we get to that point. So I think it's got to be what is normal for the two of you. And to decide that, you've got to communicate on it. And you've got to look at all the variables. I think every guy would say, if he could, he'd say 7 days a week or twice a day, or, you know, something like that, which most of the time is not realistic. I mean, I just don't think that's realistic. Sounds good. I think every guy has these pipe dreams of what it could be and all that kind of stuff. But realistically, what is going to work for both of you? Mm-hmm. And then make that the best ever. If you're a guy and you want 5 times a week and you guys settle on 2 or 3, make those 2 or 3 awesome. Just don't sit around and pout because you didn't get 5 days a week. Enjoy what you have and respect each other in the communication they're giving there. If your wife is, you know, if you got 4 kids and she's running ragged all the time and she is barely makes it to bed without falling asleep before she gets to bed, you're going to have to figure out some things that work for her. And maybe you do a weekend getaway to jumpstart that again. But again, don't look to your neighbors or your friends or anybody else. If you're talking to other guys, most of them are going to lie anyway, honestly, unless you're in a really accountability group with somebody. And so don't look at somebody else's normal. Look at what's your normal.
Yeah, that's good. That is good. Good advice. I think, yeah, I agree. Just talking to, we get a lot of people who message Awesome Marriage, and then Dylan and I administrating couples. They share a lot of things with us. And they have shared a lot of things. And I will say, like, from the abundance of people that I have talked to, there is no such thing as a normal. I know people who have sex once a week, and I know couples who have sex 4 times a week. And I was laughing a little bit when you were sharing, like, about like expectations before you get married. I knew a girl who in premarital counseling, she told the premarital counselor, like, they were like, how much do you expect to have sex when you like get married? And she was like, I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 times a day. And I was like, girl, who has time to be naked that much? That's not going to happen.
No,
it didn't happen.
You could never dress. I mean, it just wouldn't be worth it.
Oh my goodness. And so it didn't happen, but it was like a very cute moment in a story. And they figured out a good rhythm when they got married. My
expectation on our honeymoon was sex 3 times a day. Yeah. And I'm never going to say what happened, but
yeah,
that was, let me say this. I didn't communicate that to Nancy before the honeymoon.
Yeah.
But our sex life was great on our honeymoon.
Yes. Yeah. And you got to think about the semantics of that too, of just like, this is a new thing and pain, and that's a lot. Yeah.
You got exactly things that you don't think about,
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So yeah, there's no such thing. I will say though, when it comes to frequency, that it is important to have sex frequently.
Yes.
I guess regular is what I should say. I think it's important to have sex regularly. And I think once a month is not regular. So I think once a week as a minimum is a really good place to start, unless there's some extreme, extreme circumstance or something that's really preventing you from doing that.
Yeah, when I was growing up, my dad owned supermarkets and I worked for him. And so one summer I was working in the produce department, and there was an older retired guy that worked, but he was working part-time there. And he was probably 80, 82 at that time. But Saturday night every week was the night that he took mom out to dinner, and then they had sex. And the look on his face as it got closer to 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, I still remember him. To me, I thought, that is the coolest thing in the world. This guy is 80 years old. His wife is 80 years old, and they are still romancing and having sex. And I thought, that is just so cool. And so they found out what worked for them in that season of life, and they did it. And he couldn't have been happier.
Yeah, that's good. That's sweet. So next question, is there such thing as too much sex when trying to conceive?
I think sometimes what I see happen when we're trying to conceive, it becomes a job. And I know that's kind of, and the possibilities get greater, I guess, to get pregnant the more we do, and we do ramp it up in those times. But I guess it's, I think you still need to enjoy it. It still needs to be, yes, you do have more of a purpose there besides just, enjoying it together. But in the big picture too, God knows when you're going to have a child. I mean, he has it already planned out. He tells us that in the Bible. And so I don't know. From a woman's perspective, how would you say? I think it's hard for a guy to say too much sex, because I think it's hard for us to think that we could have too much sex.
Yeah, that's true. I think from a woman's perspective, just like purely practically speaking, like according to my OBGYN, because I asked when we were trying to conceive, and babycenter.com, because I fact checked, there's no such thing as too much sex as far as conceiving goes. So as far as that goes, like the physical part of it and like trying to get pregnant, like having too much sex is not going to prevent you from getting pregnant.
Yeah.
However, I do think there can be too much sex for a couple if one or both of you is stressed by it or exhausted by it. So I think the important thing to do is to talk about it ahead of time, and also tell your spouse to be honest with you throughout the whole process. So if one of you starts to feel like this is too much, you both have to have the honesty policy of being able to say like, oof, like I need a break, like not tonight or not this week or whatever it is. Just being honest with each other, I think, is the key there.
I agree. And of course we know that women try to get pregnant, stress does not help. And so the more you can, what we had did, we had a little chart. And so we both kind of knew when there was the right time and everything. And we didn't really talk about how much we just did. And I think there was not stress on it that way. We tried to let it evolve. But, obviously for your first child, when you're not having to deal with other children, you can probably have sex more. You can be more flexible with it, and you have to be more, maybe a little intentional with the others.
Yeah, definitely. Next question. How do you go about having the conversation about wanting more sex in marriage?
Most people have had fights over that. And so I think you want to clear the air of that. You want to apologize for past conversations and arguments, those things, and say, hey, let's have a new start talking about this. Talk to each other, listen to each other, and then together come together and set a goal that's a win for your marriage, for both of you. And I think if you understand each other, usually we fight about that when we're upset, or it ends up being a fight. It doesn't become a conversation. So you want it to become a conversation. So saying, hey, let's talk about this. I know we've blown it in the past. I've certainly blown it. I put pressure on you. I've said things to manipulate you, whatever it is that's gone on. Let's talk about, I really would like us we're having sex once a month. I would really like us to try to have sex once a week. Can we work on that together?
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. I think, we have a resource. It's called our lovemaking survey. It might be a good way to kind of enter that conversation. So the lovemaking survey is 55 detailed questions all about your sex life. And I agree with Dr. Kim. I think you have to be honest and have open conversations with your spouse. But I think the good part about this survey is it kind of takes some of the pressure off of you, because you're just answering questions on a page. Like, you're blaming awesome marriage. Like, blame me. I wrote the resource, for these questions. And your job is just to both of you fill it out, and then discuss your answers. And I think maybe it would even reveal like what's going on with your spouse that's not giving you as much sex as you want. Like, you might be able to find out maybe why that is when they answer their frequency questions.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, hopefully you guys will be able to make some changes accordingly based on those results. But it's just a really detailed survey that could help. That's
good. Yeah, it's a great tool.
Yeah. Next question. How do you last longer as a male?
That's a great question. Every man probably wants an answer to that.
Yeah, you're not alone. We get a lot of, I will say that, like, you're not alone. We get so many DMs about this on a regular basis. And partly because I think a lot of people feel more comfortable asking it online. But this is a super, super normal thing.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think the younger you are as a guy, usually premature ejaculation is going to be more common. I think there's some techniques, of distraction and not think about things. I think there's some medications that can help if you really talk to your urologist about it. There's some wipes that you can use on the male beforehand that's supposed to kind of numb you. Honestly, we tried that and numbed Nancy too, so it didn't work. It just was it was something that's kind of threw out. I think one thing is it's not that there's not shame in it. I think that's important for guys to know, that that's something that most guys deal with to some extent. I think it's something that you work on together, and I think you talk about it. Are there things in the actual sex act that contribute to not being able to last as long? And so you work together to minimize that, because goes back to what a guy really wants to do is please his wife. Yes, we want our own orgasm, but we want to please them. And so the longer that you can hold off, or you can do something else to make sure she has satisfaction, that's going to be the goal. And I know a lot of couples that once they do that, then it's not as big an issue if the guy prematurely ejaculates. And so I think it's something you work on together. Don't feel better. Don't feel shameful about it. I think with my experiences with age, it gets easier to control and for whatever reason. But again, I think it's something you work on together, and don't buy into some weird thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Whatever that would be,
Yeah. I'm not going to pretend to be able to speak into this because I'm not a male. But I will say
you're married to one.
I'm married to one. But I will say, I think one thing to think about, I think our culture, and like you've heard in movies, I did growing up anyways, like that was always the goal, is like a man who can last long. Like there are hip hop songs written about this, like it's a whole thing. And so I think that can put a lot of like unnecessary pressure on you, especially when you're not. So most women are not going to orgasm during sex. In fact, I don't know any women who orgasm like during actual sex, unless you're doing something else during sex too. And so I think there's a lot of pressure to like have a really long sexual intercourse, which is always so curious to me, because if that's just a normal goal for you, like that's fine, but if that's what you want to do, but it's just so curious to me, because if you're pleasing your wife first, like, does it really matter when you orgasm?
Right.
And but I think there's this like this unspoken about like pressure that like you're bad at sex if you can't last long. But it's like, well, if you've already pleased your wife, like you're good at sex. You figured out what
Yeah.
works for her. You did it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I don't know how far we would go with this,
Yeah.
but I'll go a little farther. I mean, I've had couples that would say, the wife said, I have trouble orgasming unless there's penetration. And so they had to figure out some things. And I think one couple, it was really, he didn't move and she did, and it worked for him. Okay. So, and she was able to have, or she wanted to have orgasm with penetration. And so I think it goes back to working on it together, experiment together, try some things. Okay, let's try this. And maybe you go back to, okay, yes, I'm going to make sure you're pleased first. And then, and even if you do that, you can still work a little bit on lasting longer. Sure.
Certainly.
You know, and just, again, it's communicating on it.
Yeah, for sure.
And being willing to take the time and effort to work on it.
Yeah. And I guess not being afraid to talk to safe people about it. So like, obviously like other couples are going to have experienced other things. And so is there a close friend that you could talk to that you trust? Could you talk to your pastor about it? Or someone else at church on staff? Could you go see a marriage Christian counselor who's heard, you know, Dr. Kim has heard it all when it comes to sex. Like if you want sex advice, like you should book an appointment with Dr. Kim. And so, but other marriage counselors that are local to your city too, for everyone who's listening, like are going to have that same experience because people come to them with their sex problems. So they've heard a lot of things. And so they have a lot of ideas of different things you could try.
Absolutely. And so many times a couple say, we've never talked about our sex life to anyone before. Wow. And it makes such a difference when you do, because there's always an answer. I've never had a couple that we couldn't figure out an answer for.
Well, there you go. That's super helpful. Yep. So next question, how should I start talking to my kids about sex?
I think you start early with Why Boys and Girls Are Different. There's the Learning About Sex series. It's an illustrated. I think the first one's ages 3 to 5. You can order it online. You can get it at a Christian bookstore. But I think just helping them beginning to, and I think for most parents, having a tool helps, like a book. And so if you're doing a 3 to 5-year-old one, and it's just little drawings of boys and girls and not explicit at all, things like that, you've kind of opened the door. And then you go to the next book. And so you open the door to, it's comfortable to talk to mom or dad or both about sex. And so then when they get a little bit older and you're talking more specific about things, you've already laid the groundwork. So I don't think it's somebody that say, when should I start, as opposed to how should I start? When, I think you start as early as you can, and just to acknowledge those differences, because they're curious, you know, they're going to figure that out. And so then, but I think really, and so say you haven't done it, and say you've got a 10-year-old, okay, that's hard, or 11-year-old, or maybe your daughter is just starting, you know, start her period, or whatever it is, you know, and there's development changes, and that's always hard for kids because they happen at different times, and some boys and girls both develop a little quicker than others. So I think it is just, I think the couple, I've seen, one of the things I think really works is to have a getaway. So the mom takes the daughter and you go and do an overnight somewhere, maybe just do it in a local hotel or something like that. But the goal is just to talk about that. The dad does that with the son, and just gives you some time, and it's going to be awkward. I get that. But again, having something to read together. I know there's some good books, and I'm blanking on the name, that you can read together with your kids, or that you to work on that. But you want to open that door for communication. I wanted my kids to come to me with questions about sex before they went to a friend, or before they read it on a bathroom wall or whatever, or in some magazine or something like that. And so you want that door to be open where they come to you. And that's hard, and it takes work to do that, but you start laying that groundwork as early as you can.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the book series, I think you're talking about the 4-book series where, you read it at age appropriate times. It's by Brenna Jones. And so we'll link that in the show notes. It's the series that Dylan and I are using for our kiddos. I will say I really like that series. I highly recommend it. It's 4 different books, and you read them at the different ages for the kids. They have like recommended ages on the front of them. And it's a great starting point. So it's like, for me, I'm able to look at those books, and like we've read the first one with Finley. And like when I have other conversations or she asks another question, I point back to that same language. Like, and I know, like, okay, this is where we're at as far as age appropriateness, especially if you're not an educator, I might not be aware. I'm not an educator, you know, at least not professionally. And so that's really helpful. I will say, that because Finley is our oldest, she's 6 years old right now, we've only read the first book, even though the second book says years 5 to 8, because Dylan and I have decided that since she's our oldest and she's not asking a lot of questions about sex, that we're going to wait till the later age range on that book to read it, like till she's at least 7. But one thing I have learned from my friends who have older kids is that when you have multiple kids, you have to start having conversations with them younger than you did with your first child. And the reason is because your kids talk to each other, right? And they talk to each other's friends. And so they're going to be around that. And so I definitely expect that we'll read the second book to Roman probably when he's 5, even though we're waiting till 7 for Finley, because he has an older sister and he's going to be around her friends. But here's my big advice when it comes to this, is that when it comes to the talk, it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be a talk or the talk. It's a lot of conversations over time. And like Dr. Kim was saying, you want them to come to you with questions. And so make sure your kids know that it's okay to ask you questions. It's not a hush-hush topic. It's okay to talk about sex. You want them hearing about sex and God's design for sex from you and not someone that you can't trust. So don't shush them, when they ask sex questions. It's okay to ask them that. We'll talk about that later if they like ask you at a dinner party or something. But make sure you come back and answer it.
Well, and I think one thing that I see parents, you've got to do too, if they ask you a question, you can't say, "Are you having sex?" You cannot do that. So you've got to tell them that you can ask me any question. I'm not going to ask you anything else. I'm just going to give you the information you want. Because if they feel like they're going to get grilled on it, they're not going to ask you.
That's good advice. That's good advice. But if you want more info on this topic, you can check out some of the episodes of the Don't Mom Alone podcast. It's a very good podcast for parents. On episode 328, she talks about this in great detail and gives a lot of other great resources if you're looking for more.
Good.
Next question. What do you do if your husband defrauds you? I'm guessing that this person means like degrades you.
I think actually it was interesting when I saw this. I went back in King James, the word defraud is used, and it's defraud not, and this is King James, which is so hard for me to read. Defraud not one another, except it be with consent at a time that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your inconsistency. So it's basically what we would say is depriving. When do you don't deprive your spouse of sex? And when the Bible says you're just for a time of fasting and praying. So I think if that was where she was coming, the person that was coming from, that defrauding to them would have meant that my withholding sex from your spouse, which I think sometimes people do for punishment or for all kinds of different reasons. So,
which isn't okay. It's not.
No. I think if you're gonna defraud each other or deprive each other, it's got to be mutual consent. It's got to be for a time. It's got to have a purpose, and if it is for prayer or whatever that is. So that's kind of where I'm thinking. The things that degrade you, obviously, are infidelity and all those kind of things like that. But if your husband is withholding sex from you and you haven't agreed on it, that's all right. And I would say at that point, because he's using that scripture, I would want to go to a counselor that understands scripture and can help clarify that for them. And if you're in a church where it's the pastor would uphold that, you may need to ask somebody else.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I definitely took it a different way. I took it as like the degrading and like degrading you physically. So on the off chance that person was mentioning it's hard to tell in some of these questions. So I'm sorry if we don't get to you. Well, email us and we'll do another podcast.
No, I knew that you were going to probably go that. So I thought, okay, is there a possibility it's a different way?
Yeah, no, I know. I appreciate that. So I guess if I'm thinking about like physically degrading you, I have a lot of follow-up questions that I wish I could ask, and I'm really concerned. It's not okay for your husband to physically degrade you or your wife. I would encourage you to seek a local marriage counselor on your own, like go separately, to explain what's happening so that they can help you decide next steps on the severity of the issue. But it's definitely like next steps are definitely going to include setting boundaries. If he can't respect those boundaries, consequences need to come. And that, depending on the severity of that might mean separation. Your husband or wife, whoever this is, she did say in the question, if your husband defrauds you, so wife. But if your husband needs to respect, like he needs to respect your desires and your body. So if he's doing something to your body that you've asked him not to do, that's abuse.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really sorry that that's happening to you. I'm going to say I have already prayed for you. And I pray that you get help and get safe, and that God convicts him, so that he can turn around and repent, and that you guys can restore things. But truly, we can't do this question if that's the way it is, if that's the way it's worded and meant, justice in a podcast episode. I'm just really sorry that you're going through that. But if you've already said that you don't want him to do something to you physically and he continues to do it, get professional help, get help now.
Absolutely. And a marriage certificate does not give a man license to do whatever he wants to his wife. It's just, that's not biblical. It's not legal. It's wrong. And you're never going to have what God wants you to have in marriage, let alone your sexual relationship in marriage, if those kind of things are going on. And I think for a woman to know that that is abusive, and she has every right to get help.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like what we talked about in last week's episode, all about purity. Like, that's not honoring God. That's not honoring God. You need to honor each other and respect each other's body in order to honor God in marriage. That is holy. Degrading your spouse physically, that is sinful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So next question, is anal sex okay for Christians, Dr. Kim?
I know. I always get the good questions. Okay. So this is, and I kind of wrote some stuff out because I don't want to say this wrong and I don't want to be misconstrued, but I don't see in the Bible anywhere that condemns or even mentions anal sex within the confines of marriage. It does talk about it in other areas, but not in the confines of marriage. So I think that anal sex falls within this mutual consent principle that we see in 1 Corinthians 7:5. And that is, whatever is done sexually should be fully agreed upon between the husband and the wife. Neither husband or wife should be coerced into doing something that he or she is not absolutely comfortable with. If anal sex occurs within the confines of marriage by mutual consent, then there's no clear biblical reason for declaring it to be sin.
Yeah, there you go.
Amen.
Mic drop. Yeah, I would agree. I think it's only if you both want to. I know couples who are Christians who have anal sex. I know a lot of couples who don't, but I also know a lot of couples who do. But I think that would be the key, is the mutual consent, like what you just said, Dr. Kim. And I also think, just a reminder, like, it's okay to try something and never do it again. So obviously, I mean, not obviously, but maybe obviously, most guys are the ones who are asking for anal sex. And so, like, as a wife, I've heard from Christian wives who are like afraid to do it because they're like, well, are we going to have to do this all the time? It's like, no, like, if you want to try it, first of all, you don't have to try it if you don't want to. Like, don't feel pressure to try it. Only if you want to. And if you want to try it and you don't like it, or if it's uncomfortable, or if it's painful, you don't ever have to do it again. And that's the mutual part of this, right? That you mutually agree. So that's all I would have to say about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I say in premarital is really stay at the comfort level of the one who's least comfortable. And if you do that, you're going to be okay. God does give it, I think he gives us so much leeway in that, but it goes back to mutual consent, that you both have to agree to it. And you're right. I think sometimes a wife will say, okay, he really wants to try that, I'll try it. And I think you're right. You can say after that, you can say, let's not do that anymore.
Yeah.
I just, it was hurt me or painful, or I just didn't like it. I didn't like it. It didn't draw me close to you like intercourse does. And so, but again, goes back, talk about it.
Yeah, that's good. All right. In a similar vein, is oral sex okay for Christians?
I think it's basically the same thing. Yes, I both agree. And and if you and I know that I think a lot of people know that it's fairly common, but if it's not something that's okay for you guys, or you choose not to, that's okay too. I mean, don't feel pressured because the other two couples you hang out with have oral sex and you don't, that there's something wrong with you. There's not. It's what works for the two of you.
Yeah, certainly. That's good. So last question, what do I do if I've been married for years and still don't enjoy sex? What could be wrong? Yeah,
I would want to dig deep into this. First, I would go back to what we talked about some in the last episode, and that was on medical. Is there something medical there? Is there something that, I had a couple, probably in the last year or so, that she did have some pain in sex, and it would get better a little bit, but she never was able to totally enjoy sex because of that. There's the fear of the pain, and then it would come back, but she'd never gone to a doctor to check it out. She went to a doctor. I can't remember what the procedure, what they did, but it changed it. It changed it where she didn't have pain anymore. And so first find out, why don't you have enjoy sex? Is it something from your past? Is it something that you hadn't dealt with? Did you bring some sexual baggage into marriage that you never dealt with? And so it's put a barrier there in your sex life. Is your spouse not respectful of you? Is your spouse, do you feel like you're being used? I mean, all those kind of things that we talk about in counseling to try to peel the layers back and figure out, okay, why don't you enjoy this? Because I think there's usually going to be an answer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think I just, again, I already mentioned it earlier for one of the other questions, but it's relevant. I think another tool that could help with this is our lovemaking survey, just because it might help you diagnose what's actually going on and what's kind of standing in the way. So we will link that in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good.
Well, this has been fun answering everyone's frequently asked questions about sex. Maybe we'll do this again if people submit more questions. It's been a cool conversation. Do you have any final word of advice for our listeners about sex?
Well, I think it shows us that there's a lot of questions, a lot of things to go out there. And I think it's something that it's not unusual for a couple to struggle with in one way or the other. My counsel would be to address it. Don't let something go on and on. Address it, talk about it, communicate about it. Get counseling if you need to, but don't let a barrier stay there in your sex life. Do everything you can to remove it so you can begin to embrace sex the way God intended for you.
Yeah, that is good advice. Well, if you enjoyed this podcast episode, it would be so awesome if you could share it. You can share it on social media and let other couples know about the show. Tag us when you do that. We love seeing what episodes connect with you. And if you're not already signed up for Dr. Kim's Marriage Multiplier email yet, I highly recommend you check it out. It's weekly marriage inspiration straight to your inbox. And each email includes one idea from Dr. Kim, one marriage challenge for you to accomplish that week, one resource to highlight, and one marriage question for you to leave with. So it's a really great way to strengthen your marriage and grow your marriage really easily. So you can check that out in our show notes, or you can check out at our website at awesomemarriage.com. As always, if you need anything, you can reach out to us at info@awesomemarriage.com. You can email us there. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.